Hey everyone, it's been a while. We're all a little bit older and a little bit wiser. Not us, but you people, I assume, giving you the benefit of the doubt. So MSI is upon us in a few days. So what better way to do it to celebrate MSI than do a preview of RNG? So I'm assuming all
Yay.
three of you. What? Yay,
Yay.
yeah. Yay, yeah. I want to hear enthusiasm. Like for the three people that besides us that watch LPL really want to know about RNG. Okay. Okay, so
The three
uh
English speaking people, at least,
yeah,
right?
the three English speaking people, but who gives a shit that half of China watches LPL, right? Only the West matters. But so yeah, it's for most of you, RNG is that one team that went to IM Katowice and lost to Fnatic, and then you kind of forgot who they are. You might remember that them as the team with Mata, and then his pet dog Looper, and then their three Chinese flowers. So yeah, they I don't want to say surprisingly, okay, somewhat surprisingly beat EDG in the final. I think more people than not expected EDG to come out on top, but pretty convincingly RNG beat EDG 3-1 and they qualified for MSI. So we just wanted to talk a little bit about them, how they've improved since their last international showing, and how they could possibly stack up against the other teams at MSI. So let's just start off a little bit about that series, EDG against RNG, just like a little bit of a recap. So, Kelsey, why do you think that RNG won? Was it them being the better team than RNG in general? Was it just or EDG just having an off day and RNG capitalizing on it?
So it's kind of hard to say that it was all Edward Gaming screwing up because I do think that our Royal Never Give Up have made definite improvements to how they play, and a lot of their players have significantly improved a lot. And if you talk to the Chinese players, a lot of them say things like, well, Mata descended from the heavens and gave unto us rational thinking, and so we began to approach the lane as if it is a war for the objective for minions, as opposed to an excuse to try to kill each other incessantly. So it's actually really funny because Whoosh quote unquote said it's like Mata invented this game. I'm getting a little bit sidetracked.
And on the fifth day, Mata gave the common people a common sense and said, "Go forth, my children. There,
Exactly.
there are such things as lane swap."
So I do think that there have been improvements. Royal Never Give Up, I feel like if you look at over the entire season, if you want to pick a team that has been consistently not like having their jungle and mid lane try to kill each other, or has had a level that seems to be slowly building. So you have this idea that they're making some improvements game to game. They might not be the best, but they've been consistently solid overall. Like I wouldn't call Royal Never Give Up a consistent team in their style, but I would say in terms of their level, they've been the most consistent, so they probably deserve to go to MSI the most of the teams this split. If you're picking a team that has worked really hard apparently and has shown the best form for the entire season, it's probably Royal. The problem, though, is that a lot of the things that are good about Royal weren't really exemplified in this series because Edward Gaming screwed up so much that Royal didn't actually have to be a good team in this series to win.
Yeah, what I was actually going to ask you next was what could we take away from this final that kind of exemplified what RNG's style is, what their strengths are, and what they're bringing to MSI?
So I think that the there are two Royal Never Give Ups in terms of the types of styles they try to have because they don't always effectively execute the styles that they try to or want to have. So the first Royal Never Give Up plays with Bushin, and this is the Royal Never Give Up we saw in the final. And this Royal Never Give Up is going to be extremely aggressive. They play around trying to have a strong bottom lane and strong standard lanes. They will actually actively scout for standard lanes. So it's not like at Intel Extreme Masters where they just go bottom and expect everyone to go bottom and expect duo lanes to go bottom because this is what you're supposed to do. They actually will invade and they'll place the standard scouting wards where there's one, at the top by the second tier turret, there's one by the buff, and then there's one, at the jungle entrance or some variation of this. So they'll actually do this type of scouting ward style and they'll actively look for the standard lanes most of the time. Or if they do get swapped on, they'll sometimes push out on a cannon creep and then swap back. So this is typically what they want to do, and then they have MLXG gank bottom, and they try to snowball through bot lane with Xiaohu coming down, with Looper teleporting, with all these sorts of things occurring across the map. They have another style that they play with Name, which we did not see in this series at all, so that wasn't part of your question.
So, but basically, if the other teams, when the other teams scout RNG, they can't just use this final as enough data because this only showcased how they play with Whoosh, and as you said, they have a completely different style with Name.
I think probably we'll mostly see Whoosh at MSI, so it's probably fine overall. But I do think that when they play with Name, not because Name is better in some way, actually because Name is legitimately pretty terrible at laning phase right now, they will play much more objective oriented. They'll actually look for lane swaps and they'll try to trade turrets. And they'll begin putting vision on dragon and they'll get dragons really early to try to build up to 4 dragons, at which point you have to fight them. And they'll play much better in team fights and they'll usually have a lead based on turrets. So this type of Royal Never Give Up, they don't execute it all the time, but it's something they were trying to do more often with Name. So this is the kind of glimpses of, that they kind of are thinking about objective control, or they have some idea of how to do this, but they won't necessarily do it every game. So this is kind of the coin flip that is Royal Never Give Up.
Now, we can talk more about why they'll most likely play Whoosh when we discuss how they stack up against the other teams. Speaking of objective control, something about this series that stuck out was their complete lack of objective control aside from Baron.
Mm-hmm. Their Baron control is actually pretty bad.
Well, I mean,
but continue.
But aside from that, the only thing I recall them saying is contesting is actually Baron.
Mm-hmm.
For that, during that entire final, everything else, for the most part, Dragon went untouched. They just ignored Rift Herald. So is this issue that they have just during their final series, or is this a consistent problem that they have?
It's actually funny because overall their playoffs objective control improved significantly. I think part of this is because EDG also didn't do anything with dragons, so it wasn't like they were missing a dragon or anything like this, but it's mostly in their WE series they had much better dragon control, and you can see over progression of time their objective control kind of improves over MSI. Since MSI, or not MSI, IEM, they've been moving away from this team that doesn't really value anything except Baron. They used to be the earliest Baron team in the LPL. Now they sometimes will go games without even looking at Baron, which is weird. But their first turret rate has improved, their first dragon rate has improved, they have the earliest first Rift Herald in the league. It's actually 10%, 10 to 20% difference on some of these objective control rates between their season overall and their playoffs run, which is really strange to consider because their playoffs run includes this final, but it also includes this WE series. So I
Right.
think that in general, also if you look week to week, you've been seeing these like small, steady improvements in objective control rates. So I do think that their concept overall has gotten better, but it's something that you can't rely on when assessing Royal Never Give Up. You can't rely on saying that they will take these objectives or they will prioritize these objectives because we saw the games where they flat out just didn't. I talked to Spawn, and he says he thinks a lot of this had to do with Edward Gaming, because when you think of LPL teams, they're not going to go and get objectives just to take objectives, right? There's no value in having a dragon just to have a dragon in particular. You want to try to get teams to fight you for these objectives, especially in the LPL. Edward Gaming were just fighting them for no reason. They were opting into these bot lane fights for no apparent reason whatsoever, and Royal were winning them, so they really had no reason to try to prioritize these objectives at all. So
So would you say that so as a result of, I guess, maybe Edward Gaming not playing to their usual standard, that sort of caused RNG to stray from their standard?
I would say that Royal don't really have a standard, but
You sounded so like schedule.
well, because you can see instances where they're better. You can see instances where they're doing things that a lot of people objectively consider, oh, this is rational, this is good play. But then they have moments where they just, we're gonna party in the bot lane, guys. It's cool.
So
So there isn't really a standard of Royal. It's like there are moments where they're good and there are moments where they're not.
there's just like a larger disparity of like what's considered a good game for Royal and what's considered a bad game for Royal.
Right. And another thing Spawn said when I talked to him, when I did an interview, which you can read in full on thescoreesports.com,
We'll link that at the bottom.
is that he thinks of Edward Gaming as a team that plays between a 7 and a 10, and Royal as a team that plays between a 5 and a 10. And Royal maybe played their 8 or their 9, right? And EDG just played their 7. So, I mean, that's an interesting way to think about it. I wouldn't say that Royal played their 9 or their 8, but I mean,
How would you rank that performance on a scale?
on a scale of we're going to tunnel vision Baron and actually not doing anything in the early game to really clean rotation base play that we've seen in the first two games of their WE series and their IG series before the end of the season, I think, I don't know, probably a 5 or a 6, maybe.
Okay.
It was alright. It was like halfway in between. They played stronger lanes. They obviously have a good concept of jungle control and mid lane control, which I think right now is extremely important in the meta. So even if they're not having like amazing objective control or awareness in this regard, I think that they understand that something that's really important right now in the meta is pushing out the mid lane so that you can invade the enemy jungle and have the stronger jungler in the late game. So I think that this is what Royal understand, and this is what they abused most efficiently against Edward Gaming, who were tunnel visioning bot lane, and Pawn was... I don't know what Pawn was doing. I never honestly know what Pawn is doing. But this is, in this particular meta, that's punishing for Edward Gaming.
Okay. So basically, it's fair to say that if people were looking at this series as like a typical RNG game, it could possibly backfire on them because, they've had cleaner games than this. They've had games with much better objective control and like controlling the pace of the game.
It could backfire, but it could also be like, oh, we prepared for this and they're playing even worse. You know what I mean? It could be a wide spectrum of things. So
basically, it's better to over prepare, even if they don't show up. At least it's better safe than sorry. I mean, it's
right.
Come on, guys. All right, so let's. I want to sort of talk about, as I've mentioned before, that this is probably the first time most spectators are going to be seeing RNG since IAM Academy, so where they sort of had a very lukewarm showing. I mean, they got to semifinals, which is cool, but what's changed for this team since their last international showing? How have they grown? Especially because to me, if I could sum up how RNG was back several months ago, it was like, I guess in the most basic way you could think about it, so it was sort of like win lane, win game.
Mm-hmm.
So
Kind
how it
of. Because they weren't
sort of,
even
but how
really good at that. It was a weird time. We don't talk about it.
the college years where they were experimenting. Okay. So what is their identity now?
Yeah. I'm going to try to move. Okay, so
Try to find
I'm
their
gonna go
identity.
into the land of rainbows and unicorns and warm fuzzy feelings and say that their identity is learning and growing. Okay,
Okay, so that's okay, so
that's
their
their
identity is
identity.
learning. So okay, but how have they
Okay,
improved?
so if I had to pick one thing that defines Royal Never Give Up, it is pursuit and crowd control chaining.
Hmm.
So, for me, the thing that makes Royal Never Give Up good when they're good, regardless of everything else, the most consistently good thing about Royal Never Give Up is the way that Xiaohu and Mata understand finding opportunities and openings in team fights. So usually these two synergize surprisingly well. Mata will find a target to lock down, or Xiaohu is actually usually the one who goes in first. Because I do think his opening sense, you have to think his best three champions are LeBlanc, Lissandra, and Azir. And do you think these three champions don't have a lot in common, but they're all champions that look for openings or gaps in the enemy team because you use Lissandra to flank and engage. You use Azir to kind of split the fight or to use the ult to throw people in different directions. And you use LeBlanc to get a pick off if you find gaps in the enemy flank and the enemy coverage. So I think that this is something that he's very strong with. And then Mata is very good at locking down specific targets or peeling for specific targets or chaining with this. And consistently, you see in their fights, they don't ever stack the CC on top of each other. It's always Xiao who goes in, and then Mata waits the appropriate time and then hits them again. So this is something that I find very surprising and very strong about their team fighting.
Okay. If I recall correctly, back when the split first started, the Chinese players and the Korean players sort of like played very independently from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Koreans did their thing, like Mata sort of controlled Looper from the top lane, while Xiao Huwush and LMLXG did their thing across the map. Would you say now that they're more cohesive as a team? I mean, like you've sort
Yeah.
of said that with like now that Mata and Xiao Hu have a really good synergy with each other, and then I guess during laning phase 2, Woosh and uh, Mata, when they lane together, they're a pretty strong bot lane.
I mean, Mata has gone from being the player that Vici openly have said they kicked now because his personality is not good and he didn't want to work with the Chinese players, to someone who openly kisses Wushin on the lips on stage. So, this is something that happened. Um, there are so many memes about how Mata is too friendly right now, but
Rehab does wonders.
I might put some up during this rant. No, so I think that this is something where Mata is much more invested in this team than Vici. He
Hmm.
made some comment when I interviewed him, like, Actually, because he when he did an interview with journalists at the start of the year, he said, I don't really, I'm not gonna win Worlds, but maybe if I won an LPL, that would be nice." And I kind of asked him, because you mentioned Imp and Pawn and how they won LPL, and you thought maybe is there something competitive between you? And he said, "Actually, when I joined RNG, to be completely honest, I didn't really care if we would win LPL. That wasn't really part of my thought process. But then I started playing with them, and I was like, hey, this team can win." And so that became my goal to get to the final. And then if we get to the final, we'll win. So it's just like this very nonchalant attitude. But then he's like jumping up and down and practically hugging MLXG's ribs and breaking MLXG's ribs when he hugs him, and it's really weird to see Mata like this. Like, to me, my mind is completely blown by the way he behaves on stage. I don't really understand this guy. He's very...
Tranquilizers do. It's like enough to like put an elephant to sleep, but for Mata it's enough to like tame his wicked soul.
So, it's like he legitimately gets along with the players, and it's not so much that I think friendship is magic or anything, but just the fact that Mata has shown this extra willingness to work with this particular team and to actually teach them things that I think is like, at the end of every match, you see Mata in the corner with the Chinese players and the translator having the Mata pep talk. You know, everyone knows this is the, like, all the journalists know this is the Mata pep talk, okay? Don't bother them. They're having their Mata pep talk. So.
Well, speaking of him, you know, we no, like I know, like we like to like he's a very almost he's a very polarizing figure in the League of Legends scene, just based from like what we know about him. But you've actually you said this earlier, how like they almost idolize him, but it
Hmm.
seems like he is like when he's not like being really negative about his team and he's willing to like when seeing like there's something worth investing his time into. What do you think they've like what do you see that the Chinese players, I know they've actually openly admitted to like him like teaching them things about the game that they never knew like were
Hmm.
a thing, but what do you think that his presence on the team has like bestowed upon them?
Uh, More stability. Because I think that we always knew that some of these players like Woosh and MLXG, who are on the King lineup from the end of 2014, and even at the end of the most recent year, they were winning third-party tournaments again. So you know that these players are not untalented. It's just that they've never been able to find this level in the LPL. So I think it's stability and just the ability to think about, why am I making this decision? It sounds really ridiculous, but that's how Xiaohu
No,
actually physically explained it. It's like, I'm not just trying to all in this guy and kill him, I'm actually trying to think about why I'm doing what I'm doing now. It's like, wow,
it doesn't
that's
actually seem
pretty
all that.
impressive.
Yeah, it is impressive. That's what I was. It doesn't seem all that ridiculous to me. It almost sounds like that story where, like, the veteran player comes in and you see all this young talent that with so much potential, but they can't like, they can't grasp a hold of it. Like they have good showings, but they don't know why they're good. And he's sort of like their mentor, and he's like, okay, well, this is why you're good. This is why you can't always be good, and I'm going to teach you to be good more often.
Hmm.
So
So,
it's a very heartwarming story. It's
oh yeah.
very
It's very rainbows and unicorns. You can see how, but the thing is that they're still going to get destroyed. So, moving on.
you and negative Nancy.
No, but I think that I am glad that these players are getting more international experience, because I think you have to kind of realize that China right now in the LPL is really unstable. There isn't a lot of, I guess, confidence from the players in some of the top teams who have been to the international tournaments. A lot of the top teams have had a lot of internal issues, probably pegged on by the fact that they aren't necessarily doing super well, and also all of the money and everything else. But this idea that some of these players who are going to be around when a lot of this turmoil dies down are benefiting right now and getting international experience, because these players are really young, right? MLXG, Xiaohu, Whoosh. These are players who will get something from that and they'll hold on to it for later and actually improve from. So I think that it's good that they're going now instead of a team like Edward Gaming who a lot of their players might retire at the end of this year, you know? So
No, fair enough. I believe, wasn't it like Vinci's owner or something, or Vinci's manager saying like the whole reason of getting someone like Mata is like to help like this talent grow within like the next few years?
yeah, VG Gaming's manager said that, you know, I want Mata to teach my players how to play League of Legends. And Mata didn't really want to teach those particular players, it seems, but
But I
he's
mean,
alright with Royals players.
technically he's doing what Vinci's owner wanted to do, just like with a different team.
Right. So
So technically, it was an investment. He just
I tried
wasn't the one getting
I tr
the
tried to get Mata to comment on MLXG style and what MLXG does, and he's just like, he has a lot to learn. It's like he's not good, you know, but he's getting somewhere. He's got a ways to go.
I feel like
Uh,
like it's sort of just like Mata will give him like the star, like here you go for effort.
Here's your rib crushing hug, but you actually suck.
It's just like I appreciate the you trying. Like here you get your grade for participation. But
Something like this.
let's try again. Let's try harder next next split. I said next semester.
Next semester. Basically, they actually, so I don't know if
I
you
mean, this is like modest school for talented but stupid Chinese players.
I don't know if you've seen the shorts that were between the games.
I
They
did.
made one for Edward Gaming, which was this super awkward and creepy Mako and Deft like love story, which it's awkward to watch, to be honest. And then there's someone actually made a comment because Deft's parents came to Shanghai to watch him in the final. And it's like they played this short, which is basically implying that him and Mako are gay, like pretty heavily. So you just have to wonder what his parents are thinking at that moment. But
I mean, it's a very ostentatious coming out story if you
uh,
think about it.
but then there was the Royal Never Give Up, which seemed very serious, right? Mata was like pointing to the Chinese players in front of a whiteboard, and he was talking very seriously. And at the end, they all put their hands together, and then it pans out, and the whiteboard shows like chore assignments. So, and then it shows them all cleaning the house. It's like supposed to be very funny, but the point is that this is kind of a running thing, is that everyone knows that this is like Mata's school for
Okay.
troubled Chinese players or something. God only knows.
Chinese degenerates with good potential for being good at League of Legends.
But what's really funny is Xiaohu was always supposed to be like this prodigy mid laner, right? They were waiting on him last year to come into the league. They promoted him directly from a TGA team to the LPL on GAMT. He had to wait 2 weeks before he could start because he was underage, and then he came in and it was like, oh, he's good, and then he's not, and then he's good, and then he's not, and then whoa, he can like totally solo kill this guy with Lucian mid. But what does that get you really? Nothing.
But what does that mean?
Yeah.
Uh,
So,
okay.
and now to me, he's probably the second best mid laner in the LPL because he has this consistency quality to him that he never had before.
Okay. And you think Mata was definitely the catalyst to help him
At
grow
least this is
at the very least.
this is what Xiaohu said. So I mean, he could be lying, but
He
I
could
mean,
not be lying.
yeah, he could also not be lying. Or he everyone on the team seems to suggest that a lot of their stability and improvements are sourced by Mata, which makes you wonder why they have a coaching staff, because no one seems to want to give credit to the coaching staff except for when you ask, why is Name playing this game? The coaches decided that Name would play. Why is Woosh playing this game? The coaches decided that Woosh would play. That seems to be the only function that they have, and everything else is Mata. I'm pretty sure that that's not completely true. I'm pretty sure that the coaches do part of this, but everyone gives a lot of credit to Mata, so.
So if Mata is like the teacher of like his little school, then the coaches are Name and Woosh's parents that demand that their kids participate in the activities. Okay, like everyone has a role to play. I'm like I'm really like crafting a story here in my head. It's really nice and wholesome and not at all like dark and twisty.
Not at all covered with money and scandal and.
Not yeah, that doesn't exist in China.
Okay, so.
But anyway, okay, so let's actually get to like the very heart and soul of the end point of this video finally, which is MSI and how they stack up against the other teams. Now, a big thing about this meta right now is strong jungle and mid synergy. As you mentioned before, you know, getting control of the mid lane to get control of the opposing team's jungle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of the teams, more than half, I think,
Yes.
have a very strong jungle mid synergy. Example: Faker and Blank, Perks and Trick,
Maple and Karsa.
Maple and Karsa, and okay, well, and then there of course there's like Huhi and Xmethy, and then like
Yeah, definitely at the top of my list too, you know.
yeah, I mean like they're also there in the guest cover. Who is this other Supermassive? I was gonna say Super Bad, but that's a movie with Michael Cera, and it not at all.
Probably more enjoyable to watch.
But yeah, so I don't know anything about their mid and jungle, but I'm assuming it's not up to par. Okay, so the point being is
Naru Stomaged. I watched the games, okay, but I can't pronounce the jungler's name.
It's okay. Now
it's fun.
Isn't okay, so now MLXG and Xiaohu how do they stack up against everyone else?
So I think Xiaohu has improved a lot, and I've already kind of touched on a lot of this and why I think that he defines how they play in the mid and late game. But for me, this is where most of the strength in this relationship goes. You think about Perks and Trick, and I think that this is very even give and take, because Trix does a ridiculous amount of damage for a jungler. Perks is very good at holding the lane. Trick does an amazing amount of farming, and then they are compensated for this by the fact that Kikis is actually really good at teleporting. So Kikis has a lot of the early game pressure while Trick farms. The jungle mid-center relationship on Royal Never Give Up, I think, is a bit more Xiaohu favored, because I think Xiaohu doesn't get as much lane pressure as some of the other, let's say Maple. Maple gets a lot of lane pressure. And they often, because MLXG will usually go to Mata's lane, and so Xiaohu exerts a lot of control by himself. Sometimes, if they lane swap, MLXG will opt into the standard, you know, clear one quadrant of the jungle, then go mid, gank, and then they do the 2v2 thing there while everyone else is in the side lane swapping. So they're usually pretty good at winning those 2v2s. I think that MLXG, I am probably the biggest MLXG doggy downer. I swear to God, like, I can't get behind this guy. I try really hard, but it's just, for me, he's so inconsistent. He shows games where he's really aggressive and fun to watch, and he plays, like, the funny Cinder Hulk Echo thing with the Sightstone, and he goes in and he goes out, and he's really good at playing this kite game. But then sometimes he just plays Nidalee and misses spears and doesn't do anything but farm. I feel like he's very heavily dependent on whether or not he feels he's ahead. If he feels he's ahead, he's a lot more confident. But if he doesn't feel he's ahead, he doesn't really do a whole lot of anything. So for me, this is why I have some trouble putting a lot of faith in their mid jungle duo. But I think that Xiaohu is going to be unexpectedly good because I think people are looking at Faker, they're looking at Maple, and they're looking at Perks, and people aren't looking at Xiaohu as much after he didn't do well against Fnatic.
Hmm.
So
Now, we mentioned before that Mata and Shout who actually have surprisingly good synergy. So, do you think that can compensate for maybe their lack of synergy between mid and jungle as like compared to the other teams? Like, is it like a legitimate way to yeah, like compensate for that one? Now, I don't want to say weakness, but like not as big of a strength as the other teams going in.
to an extent, just because I do think Mata is the best support going, but I also think that this mid and support are actually the two strongest roles in this tournament.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people have been hyping up the jungle, but I think it's because they overrate MLXG that they've been hyping up at their jungle, so I'm more likely to go with the supports because I think Wolf, while he isn't really stellar, he's like still good, so he's fine. Hybrid's good, Mata's good. Aframu is the only good player on CLG. Um, I don't mean this in a. He's actually like I think Aframu is really good. Darshan
Mm-hmm.
hasn't had a good showing anywhere but domestically, where there's no top lane talent whatsoever. So that's why for me, or against Flame. No, they didn't play Flame, so he doesn't even have that. Good. Moving on. Darshan doesn't really have a lot going for him overall. So
Mm-hmm.
I think this is why. Yeah, Aframu, Hybrid, Mata, Sword Art is really good. The only evidence, as Emily Rand tweeted yesterday, the biggest evidence to support the fact that Sword Art is a god is the fact that NL exists, and somehow Flash will still win games. So for me, support is really stacked role. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that support is going to play a really big factor, and Mata may be the best support of the tournament, but still, this might not be enough to.
Mm-hmm.
Because you need MLXG to be a big force in teamfights later, and I do think maybe his tendency to just do nothing but farm might work in his favor a little bit. But he
Mm-hmm.
also randomly ints into 5 people too, so there's that.
Now, let's just go. I'm just gonna go through like I guess I wanted to compare how they can stack up against each team individually, and I guess I'll just do it based on like whatever I see first. I guess their schedule. So let's start with CLG. How do you think that they stack up against CLG? I'm assuming you think they have the favor since your opinion on CLG isn't the highest.
It's not that I think CLG are actually a good team. So having bad players or players that I'm not high on doesn't necessarily mean that I don't think they're a good team. I think CLG is a good team, and they beat TSM via team play. They're actually kind of practicing right now against challenger teams, which a lot of teams are not practicing because all they can practice against are challenger teams. So a lot of teams took a break. CLG may be able to show something extra because they aren't taking a break. But I think CLG's style is not really suited to the meta because of the fact that their mid lane and jungle aren't the best. I think that carry top might open up a little bit more with Echo Nurse, so that might be good for CLG and Darshan. But at the moment, I think it's just really, really heavily dependent on TP and being able to push out mid and invade the jungle, which I do not see as CLG's strengths remotely.
Right. Okay, that's fair. I know a lot of people were talking about like who the qualifying teams for the bracket stage was going to be, and they on and I constantly heard that it was going to come down to RNG versus CLG. So interesting thoughts. So
I mean, I
their next.
can see CLG beating them because honestly, I'm not surprised by a whole lot lately. But I do think right now RNG it's one of the few matchups where RNG are actually favored just because of CLG not necessarily being able to play the meta uh, very well.
Okay. So I guess the next team they're going to be facing is Supermassive. For let's just talk about this briefly, just because you did watch them play, so you have some idea about them. But you think that this should be like an easy team for RNG, correct? They're the wild card
Yeah,
team. That's the okay. Now, instead of saying like how they could beat Supermassive, why don't we talk about what Supermassive can do to possibly beat RNG?
uh,
Based on what you saw, like from what their
I
strengths, you could
think
gather that.
Naru's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe Naru is pretty good, but like Naru had a ridiculous gold lead average for the IWCI, so he's a really good mid within the context of the international wild
Other
card in terms of
right.
laning. So it seems like Supermassive actually have an idea of how to play the meta at least in terms of controlling mid lane. So this is something that is useful, especially since Royal may put too much attention bot. But for me, it's just really hard because I also think that Supermassive aren't very aggressive and surprising compared to some of the other international wildcard teams that we saw. So this is usually the way that wildcard can kind of pull an upset is they just like surprise everyone with how crazy they are, which traditionally isn't even that good against Chinese teams anyway. So because I mean honestly, who do they think they are? I'm kidding. I don't even think China was that aggressive this split either, so it might work because, except for the final. The final, they were definitely aggressive. But overall, I think they just appeared lost this season, LPL teams in general. So maybe coming at them really hard and fast for a wild hard team is the answer in general. So
Okay. Now their next opponent is SKT. Now SKT is projected to win this tournament just because I don't like being that guy, but typically they're the Korean team more or less will win. Like I know Edward Gaming won last MSI, so there's some hope to them losing, but I mean it just seems like SK Telecom maybe before their playoff performance, we could have said like they're clearly lacking in comparison uh to Rock Cypress, who up until like this recent moment was like the undisputed best team in the world. Here, so they pretty much came at Rocks with like what's the term, all cylinders fired, and they they just played really well. They like just like doped their way into. I'm kidding, they didn't dope, but yeah, their performance was pretty spectacular. Now, do RNG have any hopes of beating them?
I think that no. Honestly, just no. Just because one of the things that I find very good about SK Telecom is just the fact that they have been able to understand optimal ward placement. So when you do see these jungle invades, they're usually accompanied by vision control. I think one of the best things that Mata has allegedly done is teach MLX had a ward because he actually does that now, so that's pretty awesome. But just overall SKT's coordination with placing ward and understanding how to play this game, and also they're much more reserved. They leave less openings because of their vision control for Royal to kind of abuse them with their surprising aggressive bottom lane style. And they won't, if they do go the Name route, they won't play the rotation game anywhere near as intelligently as SK Telecom. And SK Telecom love the Baron baiting thing. Like, they probably got that strategy from SK Telecom. So I just feel like there's not a whole lot of option for Royal Never Give Up here. Their one big advantage if they play their style with focusing bot duo 2v2 is not non-existent because Bang is a really good player. So he's like the one good AD carry at this tournament.
Hmm.
Uh, just yeah, I don't really see a lot of options for unless somehow Mata can control the lane and make Bang look silly because Wolf isn't as strong as Mata, but that's about all I got. I
Okay,
don't think
that's
it's gonna happen.
you tried though. You gave the effort is what counts. So then their next opponent is uh G2. Now G2 is another team that you have been following pretty intently just because, they're your European babies. Now, how do these
Right.
stack up? But like seriously speaking, you like know the strengths and weaknesses of this team pretty well. And I believe honestly believe them to be like the best European team in like a while back, and it turns out that was kind of the case. They would like went through playoffs, convincingly like strong. Maybe their final performance was a little but either way, how do you think that RNG stack up against them?
I think that. So I actually had an argument with someone who will remain nameless for the sake of the children. Um, where I feel like Royal Never Give Up and G2's lane swapping is pretty even
Mm-hmm.
because both teams will maybe get an advantage in a lane swap that they don't pressure super hard because I think G2's lane swap style is very similar to the way Royal likes to play their lane swaps, which is they'll trade the first turret very happily, and then a lot of times their duo lane will back on the cannon wave, and then like reswap instead of going to the free lane and taking the second first tier, and then they'll just push up and they'll use the confusion from the top laner if they can get the enemy top laner to be confused because in the Fnatic series, for example, when they did this, Gamsu actually backed twice because he wasn't sure which lane to go to. And they used this to get a wave on Kikis, and they pushed out both sideways and then rotated their duo lane mid to get pressure on the tower. And if they hadn't used their trinkets before the first back, to get deep vision, they probably could have used that time to get more vision and invade. Because this is the kind of thing that Royal like to do, is they like to use lane swap advantages to get vision in the enemy jungle and invade. Um, so for me, their style is very similar, but both teams will also make errors or not pressure their advantages as well. Because in this particular example that I used, like Gamsu just caught up seamlessly. They didn't use the wave advantage at all. They only got a little bit of damage on mid turret. They didn't necessarily do anything with the deep wards they had placed prior to reswapping. So for me, it's like you can see them getting advantages, but not doing anything with them. I also feel like Royal kind of do this, where they had a reswap instance where they didn't necessarily pressure the fact that Koro didn't have TP, because Koro had used TP. G2 just sometimes do really random shit in lane swaps, like the same Fnatic series, Kikis was decided to try to 1v1 Reckless before joining G2's duo lane in the bottom lane, and he didn't succeed and had to burn his TP to catch up to his duo lane because he tried to swap with them too late, and then they mistimed the bounce, which is a mistake no one makes anymore, right? They actually left half of the minion wave up instead of getting it down to like one and resetting it. And then Kikis tried to walk across the mid lane top and got caught and died. So it was honestly really bad. And it's like this is one of the only two lane swap games that G2 played in playoffs. So the rest of it they played the standard lanes. Like they're happy to take the standard lane scenario. So I think that G2 and RNG are actually really similar in lane swap.
Mm-hmm.
That was really long winded, and I only addressed one aspect of their play. I think that Perks is really strong. I really think
Mhm.
Perks is a good player because he's willing to be surprising with less health. And I think Xiaohu is slightly more patient and stable, which is really weird to say that a Chinese mid laner is more stable than a European one, but just
Mhm.
I actually think this is accurate. Um, but I think Trick is really good. I think Trick is probably the best jungler in the tournament. So I think Trick will be much more of a threat in team fights, and he'll play the map much better and probably get more farm and more um, and better vision control than MLXG. So I see this going in G2's favor. I do think that if they play the Dragon game that they've played off and on, Royal Never Give Up, they can bait G2 into a bad team fight late because G2's Dragon Control and Europe's Dragon Control in general is not very good. They don't
Mhm.
really think this is an objective worth taking. Um, Super early in the game, so I think Royal can start building these dragons early and maybe bait them into a fight that G2 don't necessarily want to take at a specific moment in the game, and Royal can win off of that.
So what who has the better odds between this in this matchup?
I think G2, because I
Uh,
do think G2 will have better jungle control.
Okay. So you think that's what it's all going to boil down to?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the primary factor is that both teams will actually kind of try to play a skirmish based style around mid or jungle priority. I think that G2 actually have pretty good late game, which is something that will set them apart from Flash Wolves. Uh, like even when you focus their mid lane and gank a lot, they've shown that they can compensate for that just by Trick being able to navigate the enemy jungle anyway and having good vision control. So I think that G2 are overall favored.
Okay. So the last opponent would be Flash Wolves. Now, personally speaking, I don't know too much about their most recent performances, but they are, I don't know if it's fair to say that this is probably their peak strength because I've never been uh a reliable LMS watcher, but they're basically in an upswing right now. And a lot of people are saying like don't be surprised if Flash Wolves take the whole thing. Like their people are really confident in LMS. I mean, they had a good Worlds performance where both teams got to semifinals, right? No, one. I think only one team in the one team got to.
Quarters. Quarters.
Okay,
Both of
so
them got to
but yeah.
quarters and both of them lost in quarters. But
Oh, did they? Okay.
yeah.
So, oh, all right, that's true. Okay, but either way, like no one usually has like high expectations for LMS teams. But how do you think that RNG look on paper next to them?
I think Flash Wolves are slightly favored here,
Uh-huh.
but I do think that because Karsa is better than MLXG, but Karsa's style is much riskier than MLXG's. Um, Karsa will forego a lot of farm to have lane pressure, and if you have some concept of vision control, or if you aren't willing to opt into Flash Wolf's lane swap style, uh, they have a tendency for this to be abusable because Karsa will fall behind, and what that means one of their strongest players in the late game won't be able to match up well. This means because Flash Wolves have really weak side lane players. Like I'm confident enough, except for of course Sword Art, who's really strong. But I'm confident overall to say that both of Royal's side lanes have stronger players. The way that Flash Wolves compensate for having somewhat weaker side lanes is they will have this really strange lane swap style where they will take the enemy's inhibitor and allow the enemy to take their inhibitor before 10 minutes in a side lane, and then they'll put NL in the base and have him free farm super minions for a while Karsa exerts map pressure by ganking mid or whatever else. And then NL will have so much gold on him that he'll do a ridiculous amount of damage on some long-range champion, and you have to deal with him. A lot of this theorizing came from Clemenchu on SI, but when I watched it, I found the lane swapping aspect to really complement what he said about their team fighting. So I think overall this is accurate way to describe the Flash Wolves. And so then this forces teams to kind of scatter to try to get NL, and this is how Maple picks off targets and gets. Maple is probably the most patient of the three, like, kind of promising young mid laners we've discussed. He's very unlikely to expend his cooldowns on a target that isn't priority. He will almost always get the right target in a team fight, and I think this precision and this accuracy with Maple is what makes him the best of the three. That of like Xiaohu, Perks, and Maple. I think he's very smart and he's very patient. So I think that this is why a big advantage that Flash Wolves have. And a lot of times Karsa will gank mid and get Maple ahead, and then the two of them will gank bot if they don't get their lane swap and get gold on NL this way. But again, this is a very punishable way to play. And MMD is almost always starved. So if this does shift a little bit into a top lane carry style, I mean, Looper at least has Quinn, which is a ridiculous thing to say, and I can't believe I said it. Luckily, I didn't say it with a straight face. MMD won't get any gold or any resources whatsoever, probably ever. So, but at the same time, if Flash Wolves get their ridiculous lane swap, then Royal will have to decide between giving gold to Whoosh or Looper. Whereas Flash Wolves are perfectly happy to give it to NL.
Okay, so chances are you don't see them as opting into that lane swap style that
No, especially
Flash
with
was.
since I've already said G2 and RNG usually like to back earlier than a lot of other teams. Like some teams will push all the way to base turret, but Royal and G2 almost never do that, and they almost always prefer to back after taking first tiers. So and revert the swap even if they're ahead. So I think that this is why they won't necessarily get this against RNG or G2.
Okay. Now, before I ask you how overall you think they'll place in the tournament, I want to ask you who you think is the one player or RNG people should look at that will possibly dictate their victories.
Determine whether or not they win, or
Well, like win or lose, like who's like the most who's the player that if they win they'll most likely win because of this person?
Lada. I mean, he's good. So, probably though. Gosh, this is really hard. Because I think that Xiaohu is probably easily the second best player on the team, and he's going to be a little bit underappreciated or unexpected. So I think that he'll have a huge impact, but at the same time, because the bot lane talent is not good, or the AD carry talent in particular, because I already said I think the sports is strong, Whoosh could be the deciding factor in this event as well for RNG.
Okay, that's fair.
And then
So
I feel like I don't even talk about Looper except to meme him. So he is literally like Mata's summoner spell. So
yeah, he presses D and then Quinn teleports down. So okay, so where do you see RNG most likely placing at by the end of this tournament?
Probably fourth is the place that I think they're most likely, but second to fifth is unsurprising. So I would say that they're most likely to place fourth, but I could see them placing anywhere from second to fifth.
So basically, this all comes back to the fact that their performances are often very volatile.
Yeah. Like, if they play their best game, they'll easily make second. If they play their shittiest game, they might lose to SuperMassive. Like, I'm not even kidding. So, good Godspeed, Royal Never Give Up. Godspeed.
May the odds be ever in your favor.
Oh yeah. Just never give up. Like they just literally
just
no.
never give up.
I will say the most important thing about Royal Never Give Up is that they are the only team to go to an international event since last MSI and come home without completely imploding into a fiery pit of doom and destruction. So good job. They managed to bounce back from IAM without skipping a beat. And you ask them, and it's like, oh, what do you plan for MSI? Well, MLXG will say, I think at IEM, we were only half of, the LPL was only at half strength to what it is now. And Xiaohu will say, we're just gonna go and play and try really hard. The end. Just like, yeah, that's pretty much good job. That's what I want to hear. I don't want to hear any overblown bullshit or anything like this. Just go to MSI, learn shit, try really hard, pat yourselves on the back, don't implode at the end. This is all I want from Chinese teams at international tournaments is for them to go and to actually play decently and then like decently compared to their actual level in the LPL and then to go home and not implode. This is my only thing that I ask for. So far, Royal Never Give Up are the only ones who have actually managed it. So
The bar has never been lower.
it's like, yeah, I think we're probably going to get a Chinese team in the final. Like I say over and over again, suddenly last year, yeah, I think a Chinese team can win. And then suddenly, you know what? Don't implode. It got worse. It's
Don't
like,
implode.
maybe they'll make the brackets. I think they'll make the brackets. The brackets will be good. And then it's just like, no, don't
That's
implode.
That's like a good like thing. Like, just make it to the bracket stage and we'll be happy.
Yeah, I don't think they'll make it to No, I think they'll make it to the bracket stage, obviously, because I said I think they'll place fourth, but I don't even expect this from them. I just want them to not implode. This is my only request.
What if they take first?
They won't take first.
But what if they do? What will you do?
Cry. Probably not tears of joy. Probably tears of despair that the game has fallen so low that Royal Never Give Up can defeat SK Telecom and nothing actually matters anymore.
We'll try to film this and put this on the Twitter if such scenario occurs.
Oh yeah.
So, and I think we pretty much touched on everything about RNG, right?
Yeah. It's fair.
Okay. So, are there, before we sign off, are you writing anything at the moment that you want people to know about? I know your G2 preview came out already. Are you working on other ones?
Yeah, the Flash Wolves one will be out pretty soon, and the Royal Never Give Up one will come out. And I'll also do a feature piece on Young Buck and G2 and how they work behind the scenes. Not really. Just
right.
on Young Buck and G2. That's about it. How about you, Andy? Are you doing anything exciting?
Yeah. So, get this. I'm trying to weasel my way into a pro team by pretending I'm like an analyst or a coach, and what I'll actually do is just eat their food and sleep all day.
That sounds like 50% of esports teams. So
I'm really like aiming high right now. Like I want to be part of the 50%.
good stuff.
All right, so we will. All right, I want to say I don't want to make promises, but maybe we'll try to create more videos once the news splits out. No promises. People get busy. Some people are trying to, accomplish their dream of being a freeloader. So, yeah, hopefully we can provide you with more content. But until then, bye.
They might not be the best, but they've been consistently solid overall. Like I wouldn't call Royal Never Give Up a consistent team in their style, but I would say in terms of their level, they've been the most consistent, so they probably deserve to go to MSI the most of the teams this split. If you're picking a team that has worked really hard, apparently, and has shown the best form for the entire season, it's probably Royal. The problem, though, is that a lot of the things that are good about Royal weren't really exemplified in this series because Edward Gaming screwed up so much that Royal didn't actually have to be a good team in this series to win.
Yeah, what I was actually going to ask you next was what could we take away from this final that kind of exemplified what RNG's like style is, what their strengths are, and what they're bringing to MSI?
So I think that the there are two Royal Never Give Ups in terms of the types of styles they try to have because they don't always effectively execute the styles that they try to or want to have. So the first Royal Never Give Up plays with Bushin, and this is the Royal Never Give Up we saw in the final. And this Royal Never Give Up is going to be extremely aggressive. They play around trying to have a strong bottom lane and strong standard lanes. They will actually actively scout for standard lanes. So it's not like at Intel Extreme Masters where they just go bottom and expect everyone to go bottom and expect duo lanes to go bottom because this is what you're supposed to do. They actually will invade and they'll place the standard scouting wards where there's one, at the top by the second tier turret, there's one by the buff, and then there's one, at the jungle entrance or some variation of this.
Possibly stack up against the other teams at MSI. So let's just start off a little bit about that series, EDG against RNG, just like a little bit of a recap. So, Kelsey, why do you think that RNG won? Was it them being the better team than RNG in general? Was it just or EDG just having an off day and RNG capitalizing on it?
So it's kind of hard to say that it was all Edward Gaming screwing up because I do think that our Royal Never Give Up have made definite improvements to how they play, and a lot of their players have significantly improved a lot. And if you talk to the Chinese players, a lot of them say things like, well, Mata descended from the heavens and gave unto us rational thinking, and so we began to approach the lane as if it is a war for the objective for minions, as opposed to an excuse to try to kill each other incessantly. So it's actually really funny because Whoosh quote unquote said it's like Mata invented this game. I'm getting a little bit sidetracked.
And on the fifth day, Mata gave the common people a common sense and said, "Go forth, my children."
Exactly.
There are such things as lane swap.
So I do think that there have been improvements. Royal Never Give Up, I feel like if you look at over the entire season, if you want to pick a team that has been consistently not like having their jungle and mid lane try to kill each other, or has had a level that seems to be slowly building, so you have this idea that they're making some improvements game to game.
Hey everyone, it's been a while. We're all a little bit older and a little bit wiser. Not us, but like you people, I assume. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. So MSI is upon us in a few days. So what better way to do it to celebrate MSI than do a preview of RNG? So I'm assuming all
Yay.
three of you. What?
Yay!
Yeah. Yay! Yeah, I want to hear enthusiasm. Like for the three people that besides us that watch LPL really like want to like know about RNG. Okay. Okay, so
The three English speaking people, at least, right?
yeah, the three English speaking people, but like who gives a shit that like like half of China watches LPL, like right? Only the West matters. But so yeah, it's for most of you, RNG is that one team that went to IM Katowice and lost to Fnatic, and then you kind of forgot who they are. You might remember that them as a team with Mata, and then his pet dog Looper, and then like their three Chinese flowers. So yeah, they, I don't want to say surprisingly, okay, somewhat surprisingly beat EDG in the final. I think more people than not expected EDG to come out on top, but pretty convincingly, RNG beat EDG 3-1, and they qualified for MSI. So we just wanted to talk a little bit about them, how they've improved since their last international showing, and how they could
Often with Name, so this is the kind of glimpses of, you know, that they kind of are thinking about objective control, or they have some idea of how to do this, but they won't necessarily do it every game. So this is kind of the coin flip that is Royal Never Give Up.
Now, we can talk more about why they'll most likely play Whoosh when we discuss how they stack up against the other teams. Speaking of objective control, something about this series that stuck out was their complete lack of objective control aside from Baron.
Mhm. Their Baron control is actually pretty bad.
Well, I mean,
but continue.
But like, aside from that, like the only thing I recall them saying is contesting is actually Baron. For that, during that entire final, everything else, for the most part, Dragon went like untouched. They just ignored Rift Herald. So is this issue that they have just during their final series, or is this like a consistent problem that they have?
It's actually funny because overall their playoffs objective control improved significantly. I think part of this is because EDG also didn't do anything with dragons, so it wasn't like they were missing a dragon or anything like this, but it's mostly in their WE series they had much better dragon control, and you can see over progression of time their objective control kind of improves over MSI. Since MSI, or not MSI, IEM, they've been moving away from this team that doesn't really value anything except Baron. They used to be like the earliest Baron team in the LPL. Now they sometimes will go games without even looking at Baron, which is weird. But their first turret rate has improved, so they'll actually do this type of scouting ward style, and they'll actively look for the standard lanes most of the time. Or if they do get swapped on, they'll sometimes push out on a cannon creep and then swap back. So this is typically what they want to do, and then they have MLXG gank bottom, and they try to snowball through bot lane with Xiaohu coming down, with Looper teleporting, with all these sorts of things occurring across the map. They have another style that they play with Name, which we did not see in this series at all, so that wasn't part of your question.
So, but basically, if the other teams, when the other teams scout RNG, they can't just use this final as enough data, because this only showcased how they play with Whoosh, and as you said, they have a completely different style with Name.
I think probably we'll mostly see Whoosh at MSI, so it's probably fine overall. But I do think that when they play with Name, not because Name is better in some way, actually because Name is legitimately pretty terrible at laning phase right now, they will play much more objective oriented. They'll actually look for lane swaps, and they'll try to trade turrets, and they'll begin putting vision on dragon, and they'll get dragons really early to try to build up to 4 dragons, at which point you have to fight them, and they'll play much better in team fights, and they'll usually have a lead based on turrets. So this type of Royal Never Give Up, they don't execute it all the time, but it's something they were trying to do more